Members of our Fox family, Charles Krauthammer, Fox syndicated columnist and Fox News contributor, releasing a letter today that we're going to read to you. Charles writes, "I have been uncharacteristically silent these past 10 months. I had thought that silence would soon be coming to an end. But I'm afraid I must tell you now that fate has decided on a different course for me. In August of last year, I underwent surgery to remove a cancerous tumor in my abdomen. That operation was thought to have been a success, but it caused a cascade of secondary complications, which I've been fighting in hospital ever since. It was a long and hard fight with many setbacks, but I was steadily, if slowly, overcoming each obstacle along the way and gradually making my way back to health. However, recent tests have revealed that the cancer has returned. There was no sign of it as recently as a month ago, which means it is aggressive and spreading rapidly. My doctors tell me their best estimate is that I have only a few weeks left to live. This is the final verdict. My fight is over. I wish to thank my doctors and caregivers whose efforts have been magnificent, my dear friends who have given me a lifetime of memories and whose support has sustained me through these difficult months, and all my partners at the Washington Post, Fox News, and Crown Publishing. Lastly, I thank my colleagues, my readers, and my viewers who have made my career possible and given consequence to my life's work. I believe that the pursuit of truth and right ideas through honest debate and rigorous argument is a noble undertaking. I'm grateful to have played a small role in the conversations that have helped guide this extraordinary nation's destiny. I leave this life with no regrets. It was a wonderful life, full and complete with the great loves and great endeavors that make it worth living. I am sad to leave, but I leave with the knowledge that I lived the life that I intended." Fox News Sunday anchor Chris Wallace joins us live from Singapore. Chris, your thoughts as we learn about this, about our beloved memory of this Fox family, Charles Krauthammer.
Well, what the tears I hear in your voice are the tears that I shed about 10 days ago when Brett Baier shared a personal email very much along these same lines that he had received from Charles. As you read the email, as you just read it now, you didn't know where the story was going, and it seemed hopeful. And then, as he discovered to his shock, the cancer had returned. And there are two lines in it when he talks about the final verdict is in, my fight is over, and finally, when he says that I leave this life with no regret. It is such quintessential Charles Krauthammer. It is so graceful, it is so honest, it is so brave. There is so much to say about Charles Krauthammer. I mean, just the origins of his story. At Harvard Medical School, 22 years old, jumped into a swimming pool one day, a strong, strapping man, and broke his neck. And as only Charles could tell the story, he knew that he had broken his neck because he was studying the central nervous system. In fact, the textbook was on the pool deck. And as he lay there at the bottom of the pool before somebody rescued him, he realized exactly what had happened. Now, so many of us would have crawled into a ball or been filled with self-pity. I never, in all the years I knew Charles, ever heard him express any sense of pity. Why me? He led his life fully, vibrantly. Yes, he was very badly disabled, no use of his legs, almost no use of his hands, and yet he lived a full life. He had a car outfitted so that he could drive the streets of Washington. He loved his Washington Nationals. He led a life of passion and of great consequence. I think about Charles. He went on to become a great psychiatrist. He then joined the Carter administration, and as part of the Washington conversation, then became one of the masters, first at the New Republic and Time, and eventually we were honored and graced to have him at Fox News. A couple of things about Charles. First of all, you couldn't read a Charles or listen to a Charles commentary and not learn from it and not be stunned by how gracefully and beautifully and forcefully it was written. I think the thing that I admire most about Charles, though, is that in a world in which there's a tendency to fall into tribes. You're in this camp or you're in this camp. Charles' camp was his honesty, his values, his conviction. He could be lacerating and going after the excesses of liberalism. He could be just as tough going after the betrayals of his conservatism. Charles, if you're out there, if you're watching this with your beloved wife Robin and your dear son Daniel, who I know have been such a support to you in so many ways, I want you to know that I love you. I flatter myself to consider and feel so honored to consider myself a colleague of yours. You are a great man.
Chris Wallace, thank you. So many of us are sharing those sentiments about Charles around here today. So many of us feel so blessed to have known him, to have worked with him. Chris, thank you. And Charles Krauthammer Harris won the 1987 Pulitzer Prize for Distinguished Commentary. And in that, you heard him thank all those that he has worked with through the years. He began writing that column for the Washington Post back in January 1985. What a career he has had.
Well, and a couple of different careers. You heard Chris talking about the fact that he had that book on the central nervous system poolside when he jumped into the pool. He actually had gone to Oxford to study politics, but he ended up at Harvard and came out a doctor and practiced medicine for a few years before getting into politics. Perhaps one of the people who I know worked most often side by side in those big political moments here at Fox News is now sitting next to me, and that's Juan Williams. Juan, you had a special friendship with Charles Krauthammer that went beyond politics.
Well, it's very much about, we were both big baseball guys, and I remember Charles driving me in his specially equipped van that Chris Wallace just mentioned over to Nats Park. And I said to him afterwards, I said, I don't think I've ever put my life at such risk. Because Charles really, here's a guy who's dealing with his paralysis and all that, and he's just whipping around through the streets. It's pretty cool. But, Sandra mentioned the Pulitzer. I think that it's so important for people to understand. Charles Krauthammer is considered to this moment the most influential conservative columnist in America. And that's why he came here to Fox. And, I covered the Reagan White House, and Charles was rising to fame at the same time. My mentor at the Washington Post editorial page was a woman named Meg Greenfield. She was the one who really worked with Charles.
And she's quoted having said about him that there's no trendy when Charles Krauthammer
because
writes.
His intellect is so astounding. Charles is a guy that would come up here and tell me he's going to the World Chess Series or whatever. Charles was a chess nut, baseball nut. And what's great? Loved his wife, Robin, lawyer, artist.
They have a son.
Right, Daniel. But also, one of the most touching things I ever dealt with Charles was a column he wrote. And I don't know if you ever saw his book, Things That Matter. It became a huge bestseller, Brett Baer, and he really worked that. And in that book, he has a column about his brother Marcel, who died in his late 50s of cancer. And he tells this story about coming up here to Long Island Beach in New York during the summers. And they would sit on the dock, they would play, they would invent games. The brother was a little bit older. He said his brother was his mentor in everything, taught him how to play games, how to tie up a sailboat in a storm. And at the end of the column, he writes, there's a picture of them, his brother's arm over his shoulders. And he says, ever brothers, ever young, ever summer.
Wow.
And there's this powerful sense of, we all have these moments in our life when we're together.
Yeah.
And it's that way with Charles. I remember he's Jewish, and he did something in Washington so astounding, Harris. He started something called Pro Music Hebraica, which is ancient Jewish music, and he brought it to the Kennedy Center and put it on in a concert hall. Well, I don't know if you mainstreamed it. I remember sitting there with my wife, and we were like, wow, we wouldn't be at this concert if it wasn't for Charles.
Beautiful, though.
It was amazing.
I just go back to something that Chris Wallace said, and you can never count Charles out of any conversation.
No.
Right? He elevates everything. He is that high tide that raises all boats. And so, as he puts out this letter today and lets us know what's going on with him, I'm hopeful that we'll continue to hear from him. And what Chris said resonated so much. Graceful, innocent, and brave is those things that you say about Charles Krauthammer. Just a real quick story. We met in a sports suite here at Fox News, and there was a big sporting event going on, and I walked in, and he kind of joked with me, and he said, so, how much of this sport do you play? And I looked at the screen. I couldn't even tell what it was. And I was like, well, I play everything, not necessarily well. And we kind of had a laugh about that. And he said, make sure that you continue to try everything in front of you, because you never know when those biggest moments are going to come. So we don't know if his biggest moment is yet to come. This letter tells us something about his current journey. But Charles is still here. And if we know him well, and I don't know him as well as you do, but you know that that spirit in him is alive and well, we will hear from him.
You know, I just think it's important to understand he's a guy that lived life to the fullest and enjoyed life, and in that letter celebrated life.
He's still celebrating.
Yeah, he's not down. I mean, so to me, it's almost like an example of tremendous personal courage and character. So he's a brilliant man. He may be the most brilliant man. I mean, you were right. We're all honored to have been able to engage. I was arguing with Charles about so many.
He was the only person I knew that could make you be quiet.
Oh, he shut me up. I'm telling you. He's terrific. But it's the courage, and even to this moment, the example to all of us about being well, I was going to say being a man, but being a human being in the full. And
Stand
that's
up.
Charles.
Stand up.
And Charles continues to reach out and touch so many. Yeah. And I know in his absence, Brett Baer said I would get thousands of requests for an update.
Yeah. I see it on Twitter. I would see
day.
Brett responding to people on Twitter saying, you know, this is as much as I can tell you. And yeah, and now, of course, Charles breaks his own news with his letter. Yeah. Very quintessential, our friend.
Just a quick expression of love to his wife and to his son. They're great people, and I think Charles, you know, his life and his love really is reflected in what great people they are.
Oh.
Charles, our thoughts and prayers are with you. We'll be right back.
Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.